What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today we're doing a book review of The Everything Store, Jeff Bezos and the Age of Amazon by Brad Stone. Just finished this book, a phenomenal read, perhaps the most in-depth recount of the story of Amazon from start to finish, how Bezos had this idea. We was working at the hedge fund D.E. Shaw way back when, all the way through towards 2012 or 2013. I mean, this is the real story of Amazon. So like most of these book reviews, I will go through the pages I highlighted and then give sort of a high-level analysis of the book. The first week they opened, in 1995, when they opened the store, they received $12,000 worth of orders for books in the first week, $14,000 the next week. And they were sort of in this crazy scrambling startup mode ever since that day to try and keep up with demand. Around that time, Bezos was trying to raise capital for Amazon and put out financial projections that seemed insane. He was saying that in the year 2000, he assumed that Amazon would be able to generate $74 million in sales if things went moderately well, and $114 million in sales if they went better than expected. The reality is Amazon did $1.64 billion in net sales in 2000. So even though Jeff Bezos had these incredibly lofty projections, Amazon in reality actually achieved them by a factor of 10x. So it just, it's hard to fathom and wrap your head around just how rapidly Amazon was able to grow. Another interesting tidbit here, and this one's sort of a parallel to Tesla, is back in around 1996, Amazon only had 16 million in sales per year. Barnes and Noble had notched $2 billion in the same year. And they wanted to work out a deal together. The companies were meeting, and I just think it's so interesting that the incumbents, and it wasn't even like they were competing with the mom and pop bookstores, the independent bookstores, etc. Those were already sort of going out of business and really suffering at the hands of these huge chains like Borders and Barnes & Nobles, who at the time were doing billions in revenue, and Amazon was seen as this sort of little pipsqueak who, although was doing something differently on the internet, was a joke. Every little company has this pattern and this interesting story of like they're never taken seriously, they're always way tinier, and the success of their predecessors eventually ends up being what kills them because they're so confident on what got them to where they are that they ignore the future. I think that's what's happening with the legacy automakers, and why it took them so long to take electric seriously is a very eerie and interesting parallel here towards Amazon, where it took their competition Barnes and Noble so long to take the internet seriously that is eventually what killed them. And they just everyone assumed that because they had so much money and because they were in the book business for so long that they would easily be able to pivot, when the reality was that the skills needed to efficiently run a warehouse and distribution center were way different than any of the skills that Barnes and Noble had developed when it was building its company. And I think that's a really fascinating parallel of exactly what's happening with Tesla now, is where everyone says the auto companies are way bigger, they're selling way more cars, but really under the hood, what's different is there's been this incredible disruption in the industry where we're going electric to software first cars. Despite the auto companies being much bigger and having much more capital, are going to have a really hard time adapting towards, A, because they're not taking it seriously till it's too late, and B, because they just have no skills in those areas. This is a part where I think is really also building on the Tesla analogy. In 2000, as the market started crashing, there was an analyst, Ravi Surya, who started making negative commentary about Amazon and constantly saying the company needed to raise capital, they were losing money. I'll even read you one of the quotes here. They have an exceedingly high degree of ineptitude in areas like distribution. And then he also goes on to say, we believe that the company will run out of cash within the next 4 quarters unless it manages to pull another financing rabbit out of its rather magical hat. So this is really interesting. And then even Amazon goes on to, fight the report, saying that it was hogwash, pure unadulterated hogwash is what Bezos said to the Washington Post, ironically. But so, this is once again that pattern of disruptive startup, burning capital, growing rapidly. Analysts start hopping on the train of saying they're gonna need to burn money, they're running out of capital, as the market comes down. Was just incredibly, I just thought there was a really interesting parallel towards Tesla, where it's hard to imagine today with Amazon so successful that you would say analysts were predicting it was gonna run out of money, but that was what indeed was happening. And my favorite little tidbit here is when he says that they have shown an exceedingly high degree of ineptitude in areas like distribution. So this is, I believe, what is actually another fascinating parallel between Amazon and Tesla. The analysts point out to areas like distribution in Amazon's case where they're struggling because they're going through growing pains, when in reality, that is the biggest core competency and advantage that the company has. With Tesla, I believe that's manufacturing. Because they're scaling so rapidly and going through growing pains, in the media, everyone's saying they have problems and manufacturing is their weakness, when in reality, manufacturing is actually the company's greatest strength, and using robots and software to build cars is what's going to lead to a long-term competitive advantage, and that is really the bread and butter of why they are so disruptive and where the value is being generated. But yet analysts somehow interpret this as that's the weak point. And then it's so ironic that Amazon had that exact same thing go down, where analysts were saying their distribution was where they were weakest, when we all know today that's 100% what Amazon won at. Switching gears a little bit, they tell this little anecdote of how Bezos was valedictorian of his high school. I mean, the kid was incredibly smart from an early age, and he gave a speech in his when he was one valedictorian to his fellow students, and it was so fascinating. And I'm going to read you the line in the book where they talk about it. His high school teacher described the speech. She goes, "She still has a copy, which includes the classic Star Trek opening, Space, the Final Frontier, and discusses his dream of saving humanity by creating permanent human colonies in orbiting space stations while turning the planet into an enormous nature reserve." These were not pie-in-the-sky ideas. They were personal goals. Whatever image he had of his own fortune, it always involved becoming wealthy, Ursula Werner says. There was no way to get what he wanted without it. What exactly did he want? The reason he's earning so much money, Werner told journalists who contacted her in the 90s seeking to understand the internet magnate, is to get to outer space. And then it segues how in the year 2000, Bezos went on to found Blue Origin, his super secretive space company, which I guess technically, if you give him credit for founding in 2000, he actually started before Elon Musk started SpaceX. So even though these billionaires, Bezos and Musk, get into this beef over the space race, and you may say like, well, they have too much money, they're just investing in rockets because they have nothing else to do. What I think is really interesting is that both Elon Musk and Bezos, almost separately during their childhoods and early adulthood, came to this conclusion and vision that space is the next sort of Wild West or frontier for humanity, and that is the grand prize in their lives that they want to achieve, is to go to space, to build the infrastructure, to allow humans to explore space. And Bezos, for all the grief that I give him for trying to pollute the planet by making it easier for us to buy crap we don't need, driving trucks from cross country, his real mission here, and if I had to guess why he's motivated to make so much money, I believe this is the clue. He wants to basically create human colonies orbiting the planet and create the planet and use Earth as a nature reserve, which is a crazy idea of the future, totally Star Trek-esque. It would solve a ton of our environmental challenges. Can we build industrial zones in space? What would that look like? And that just has my mind like totally wandering in a million different directions. Here they also have a tidbit where they talk about Amazon Prime. They didn't know where to price Amazon Prime, and Amazon Prime falls into the bucket of this pattern of Bezos constantly has these incredible visions of like, let's get customers the ability to get free shipping in 2 days, and then the whole Amazon team is like, what? We're going to lose absurd amounts of money on that. There's no way we can do it, but he pushes the team to do it. Very Elon Musk style, setting impossible goals. And one thing that was so interesting about Prime, which is now this incredible business, is going to make the company absurd amounts of money, is a foundation of their success. They had no financial justification at the time for why it would work. They didn't have a financial model. They couldn't rationalize it. But Bezos knew that there was this flywheel effect in Amazon's business where customers who spent more on the platform ordered more, and therefore, increased the sort of economies of scale, made it cheaper for Amazon to ship, therefore made it easier for them to offer faster shipping options. Like, I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but there was this reinforcing loop whereby offering faster shipping, consumers would order more and therefore decrease Amazon's logistics prices by sort of this economies of scale effect with deliveries. And so they just kept betting on this flywheel effect and on the customer and doing what's right for the customer before thinking about Wall Street and financial models. And although that seems super counterintuitive and sort of shooting by the hip at the time, some of those decisions have led to Amazon's greatest advantages. In terms of the founding of AWS, a ton of fascinating little stories here about how, other retailers started to want to get into the internet. Amazon started selling off portions of its backend to them. helping companies like Target and Toys R Us run their first online websites. That became AWS and Amazon Web Services. And as they sort of developed this idea, Bezos had this incredible vision for what AWS is. And he says, the best analogy that I know is the electric grid. Bezos said, you go back in time 100 years. If you wanted to have electricity, you had to build your own little electric power plant. And a lot of factories did this. As soon as the electric power grid came online, they dumped their electric power generator and they started buying power off the grid. It just makes more sense. And that's what's starting to happen with infrastructure computing. I love that analogy, and it really helps put into perspective, just how fundamentally important AWS is and how it's such a pillar and backbone of the new digital economy. There's a ton of little tidbits here, but another big takeaway I had is Amazon was ruthless. Like in terms of the examples of them negotiating with the publishing houses for prices on their ebooks when they got ready to launch the Kindle. I mean, there was a ton of controversy there. They pushed them on pricing. They were, they withheld some information about what they were planning to do, price all books at $9.99, which they knew they were going to piss off publishers doing. So when they pitched them on the Kindle, they didn't tell them the price. That ended up resulting in this incredible lawsuit that played out in the press for years and years and years. Additionally, there's examples of them buying, the company Zappos, of them buying the diaper company, I believe Quidsy. Amazon was ruthless. Like they would compete with these companies and they would say, okay, if you're not going to sell to us, we're going to screw you and take your products off Amazon and hit your sales. And then we're going to start selling diapers or shoes and lose money on every single sale till we put you out of business. I mean, this was like some purely Darwinian, Amazon used every power it had to manipulate prices, to skirt around the law. They avoid paying sales tax as long as possible. Nothing was out of question. And so I just think the ruthlessness of Amazon cannot be understated. Or maybe even ruthless isn't the word, relentless. Even Amazon.com was almost named relentless.com, and actually the URL of relentless.com still redirects to Amazon this day. A couple other really interesting tidbits in this book. Bezos was one of the earliest investors in Google. That's right, he was in Silicon Valley, met up with the Google founders, wrote an original check that today would be apparently worth over $1 billion. It's still unclear whether he cashed out or sold it or when he got rid of it. But I mean, Bezos is also an incredible investor. He has a venture firm called Bezos Expeditions, where he invested in Twitter, Uber, the new hydroponic indoor farming startup called Plenty. So, Bezos, he owns the Washington Post. They also mention how he has this crazy project to build a 10,000-year clock in the middle of this mountain in his Texas ranch, which goes to symbolize long-term thinking. And that sort of sums up one of the biggest takeaways from Bezos that I had is his biggest advantage is perhaps time arbitrage. He thinks about things so long term and is willing to take such a patient approach that is a huge advantage versus the short-termism that is so subjective to Wall Street. And that is why, he has this saying that Amazon is willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time because people don't get what they're doing and it doesn't pay off. I mean, there's so many examples of this, the Fire phone and the Fire tablet, which were a total flop, but were part of the Lab 126 R&D lab that eventually came up with Alexa. So, that hardware project that everyone would have written off as a total joke, waste of money, scrap it, Amazon messed up, they tried to get into hardware, huge mistake. Well, they kept persisting. They were relentless and they ended up with Alexa. And so, these tenets of long-term thinking, of focusing on the customer are really powerful. Going back to Tesla, I know I've been tying Tesla a lot back to this, but of course, I've really been trying to do this case study of like, how is Amazon like Tesla? Is the comparison accurate? And I think it really is. The companies are very different in a lot of ways in the businesses they're in, but in the philosophies, they're very, very similar. They want to disrupt. They want to change. The leaders are bold. They are incredibly cutthroat environments. I mean, there's countless examples here of employees burning out, of Jeff Bezos being crazy, of him pushing his team like hell, of people working hard, of the workers trying to unionize. This is exactly what we're seeing repeated in the Tesla story as they go through this similar kind of growing pain phase. At the end of the day, that sort of incredible work environment with a crazy leader who works his ass off with this culture, does lead to building incredible, lasting empires and companies. Amazon, they were losing billions of dollars back in the day. Analysts were saying they were 2 quarters away from going bankrupt. This is the same thing we're seeing with Tesla. And once again, they were always, putting too much weight on the near-term financials and putting not enough weight on the long-term vision. And so I think that is a very, very clear parallel. In terms of just Amazon though, the biggest thing that I get from this book is like we are still just scratching the surface of what this company is. So I'm gonna put a Moonshot Monday episode out that says Amazon's not going to 1 trillion, it's going to 2 trillion. And I frankly think they're gonna be going to several $1 trillion market cap in the next few years if they don't get broken up. This company is a juggernaut in the making. So stay on the lookout for an episode where I get deep into the business of Amazon and where I think this will go in the next 3 to 5 years. But I'm a huge fan of the company. This is probably by far my favorite large cap stock in the entire world. I'm not counting Tesla as a large cap, but just the way the company's run, their vision. Bezos is a really, really interesting character. And before I started this book, I think he sort of seems like more evil to me, or not evil, but I don't get why he's doing it. With Elon Musk, it's such a clear motivation. We need to go to space. The future can't be boring. We need to be sustainable. Those are clear motivations. Bezos has been much quieter and close to the vest with his motivation, which is actually ironically similar, which is, in my opinion, to get humans to space and sort of build this futuristic spacefaring civilization. And that is why he's motivated to build, absurd, life-changing, multi-$100 billion wealth, because that's what it takes to build that. And so that makes me think he's a little more good and gets me a little more excited about the future. And so I hope Amazon succeeds, because I hope that he does have billions of dollars to pour into Blue Origin, because I think that would be incredibly exciting. So anyway, that is sort of my rant and my ramblings of the book. I'm giving this 5 out of 5 stars because it's just an unbelievable piece of history, incredibly well written. Great job, Brad Stone. And just, Bezos, he's only getting more important. And I think understanding where he comes from will give you key insight into the Amazon story that is just really helpful in understanding, what the hell the company is. Anyway, this is Hyperchange. Please leave in the comments below if you have any other books I should read. Now that I'm done with this one, I got to start the next one. Also, if you like the show Hyperchange, definitely check out our Patreon page and consider supporting there. Huge shout out and thank you to all of our current Patreon supporters. Anyway, this is Hyperchange. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.